Hello, everyone, and today I shall give my storytelling for the development of science over time. So, starting with science's roots back before 500 BCE, with the roots of science tracing back to ancient civilizations such as Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and China. The knowledge at the time was very mostly practical for survival, such as, for example, um, Egyptian farmers would study the floods of the Nile to predict their crops in the harvest season. Babylonian astronomers would map the sky and the stars just to help guide their travelers. And China and India, well, it's pretty straightforward, such as, for example, medications you get. With China, for example, finding anesthetics. There were no such thing as laboratories or experiments. It was only basically observation, experience, and belief, where science and myth walked hand in hand. And everything at the time was aimed for more practical needs. So after moving on from the ancient period, we move into the classical period, which is from 500 BCE to 500 CE. This is when the Greeks and the Romans ask not just how, but why. This is where they laid down the foundation of systematic thought, with science becoming more philosophical and logical, moving from pure observation to reasoning and theoretical explanations, with scholars like Aristotle, Hippocrates, and Archimedes emphasizing natural laws and rationality, basically. Science basically became philosophy, a search for laws of nature. It was an age of thinkers who laid down the foundations for what would be future discoveries to get. With the develop, which is concepts such as the natural causes for phenomena instead of purely divine explanations, for example. Then moving on to the medieval period, from 500 to 1300 CE. After the fall of the Roman Empire, much of classical knowledge was preserved in monasteries and later transmitted through scholarism into Europe, basically. So, at the time, knowledge was dimmed at the time. Science was basically now a part of faith, and scholars tried to unite reason with religion. For example, during the Black Death, also known as the bubonic plague, during the medieval period, there was a lack of understanding of how the bubonic plague worked and where it came from. Basically, people thought it was an act of God. Even a respected medical institution in France gave a letter to the king, gave its logic that it was caused by the congestion of 3 planets, which led to a deadly pestilence in the air, which led to the now very much outdated miasma theory, or bad air theory. So, at the time, science was strongly influenced by theology and religion, and interpreted through biblical frameworks, for example. And then progress was slow due to lack of experimentation and focus on rather than thought, for example. And then, while, science was moving at a slow pace, the question of why was still echoed, basically. And then moving on, after the medieval age, we now go towards the Islamic Golden Age, from 8th to 14th century. The Islamic world then became the scientific advancement center of the world, preserving and expanding all the previous knowledge from Greek, Persia, and India, and our Muslim scholars emphasize empirical observation and experimentation, which pioneered the modern scientific approach, basically. So, at the time, they had basically expanded on what was already known and pushing it further, basically. So, it led to the establishment of libraries and observations like the Baghdad House of Wisdom, for example. with developments on astronomy, mathematics, alchemy, and optics to get. For example, during this time, Al-Khwarizmi gave birth to algebra, whichever we all learn today in math. Ibn Sina wrote the Canon of Medicine, which is used in Europe for centuries, and Al-Hazen experimented with light and vision, which was the roots of today's modern optics. These scholars believed that understanding the world was a way to understand the Creator, and they preserved and refined the spirit of inquiry, the heartbeat of all science. And then coming up to the fifth period, which is the modern period, the 15th century to the present day. So the scientific revolutions of the 16th and 7th to the 17th centuries marked a turning point, which then led out to the age where the modern age of science was born, basically. And everyone started to ask the questions. For example, Copernicus dared to say the earth revolved around the sun. Galileo raised his telescope into the sky and proved it. And then Newton revealed the laws of motion that govern every falling apple and orbiting planet. This was the time where science became what it is today, using the scientific methods such as hypothesis, experimentation, analysis, and conclusion, using the empirical and objective approach. And then finally, and this is the time where science was separated from religion and philosophy, being a study of pure knowledge. And this led to the growth of the very specialized divisions of science, such as physics, chemistry, biology, etc. And this led to the rapid innovation of technology and the industrial application. It was from that moment on, science became a method, and the world transformed with it. Everything from Newton's laws to Einstein's EMC square and Darwin's theory of evolution. It grew to what science is today. It lives as every heartbeat of progress. Everything from the medicine that we take to the science to the AI that we use, and most importantly, from the questions we still dare to ask. The story and development of science is a story of us humans, a species forever curious, forever reaching, and forever seeking to understand the universe around us. Thank you all for listening. I apologize if there's any mumbles in my voice. I'm not feeling too well today, but I do hope that everyone finds my video a bit intriguing, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you.